Hi, everybody, and welcome back. We are going to be going through middle childhood development in this chapter. So, in middle childhood, we're talking between the ages of 6 and 12, and growth is going to be slow but steady. But at the same time, physical strength is developing, and you're going to see a noteworthy change in your child's frame. It's going to be it's going to be bigger, it's going to be more muscular development during this stage. Around the age of 6, primary teeth begin to fall out and they're replaced by permanent adult teeth. So we're seeing mouth growth and development as well. And it's important to point out that this stage between 6 and 12 is incredibly important for nutrition for kids in terms of their development. Okay, we want to be able to maximize their ability to thrive. And what we have found through the research is that children who receive better nutrition at this stage of development have just a litany of positive impacts long term, including lower rates of anxiety, better social engagement. They tend to be more physically active. They tend to have better cognition and better cognitive growth and performance, and they display a wider range of emotions than kids who have nutritional deficits. Why is that? Largely because of brain development and cognitive development, right? That if we're not properly fueling the body, not only can we not see everything from the neck down grow, but we're not properly fueling the brain. If we're not properly fueling the brain, it's not going to develop in an optimal capacity. So nutrition between 6 and 12 is of the utmost importance. Children with inadequate nutrition will fail to grow to their full extent. They will also fail to reach all of their cognitive abilities and potential. So you want to make sure that you are prioritizing good nutrition, good sources of quality protein, right? Complex carbohydrates, not empty carbs with sugar. Fruits and vegetables, making sure they're getting vitamins, making sure they're getting nutrients. In large part, I mean, not just for growth and development, but we are also currently here in the United States battling and struggling with the childhood obesity epidemic. This is something that is new in the past 2 decades. It really did not exist prior to 1990. Childhood obesity just wasn't a thing. Part of that is because our American diet has changed so drastically. We have more processed foods, more foods with chemicals and preservatives and dyes than we've ever had. And our diets are, really fueled by a lot of empty nutrition, a lot of empty calories, empty carbohydrates, a lot of sugars. And all of that is spurring on the childhood obesity epidemic. So childhood obesity is going to be defined as body weight that is 20% or more 20% greater or more than the weight of somebody at that average age and height. Genetics can be a factor in childhood obesity. There are certain genetics that can predispose some children to weight gain. But most children's weight and weight gain is going to be similar to that of their parents. Okay. And again, that goes back to that genetic influence. However, there's also environmental causes to weight gain as well. Like I said, our diets are unhealthier than they've ever been here in the United States. And we have tons and tons of processed foods. The best strategy for weight loss among children is it's multifaceted. Okay, first of all, stop bringing garbage into the house. You are the one who goes to the grocery store. You are in charge of the purchases. If it's not in the house, they simply don't have access to it. Yeah, they might have some access to it at friends' houses or at school, but if you're not supplying it in the home, you're cutting off the main pipeline of how the really unhealthy food is getting into their system. So don't bring it into the house. You want to encourage physical activity, right? You don't want to say like, hey, we got to go make it, get on the stair climber for an hour because, no kid is going to embrace that. But you want to encourage physical activity that's fun, right? And that's the perfect thing about weight loss at this age is that this is what kids do, right? Their games are centered around physical activity. Let's go play some tag. Let's play red light, green light. Let's do 50-yard dashes and see who can go the fastest, right? You make games out of it. You encourage physical activity. You don't want to harangue them about their weight, or obviously you don't want to make them feel self-conscious or insecure. But there are things that you can do, like introducing healthy eating habits, getting the bad food out of the house, and making sure that they maintain an active and healthy lifestyle. And of course, getting them involved in activities and sports is a great way to do this. Okay. It's also very common between the ages of 6 and 12 for us to see the onset of asthma among kids this age group. We've seen a drastic increase in asthma, in childhood asthma, during middle childhood in the past 3 decades. Prior to the 1990s, once again, we just didn't see rates of asthma in kids this high at all, not or even close to this high. Something has certainly changed between now and then. One of the working theories is that we have around that time, ish, we started changing the weatherproofing in houses that were being built. And it may be those materials that are used in the weatherproofing that are present in most houses now that were not present in houses prior to 1990 that is driving these respiratory issues and driving those asthma rates in middle childhood really high. But it's definitely become a much more common thing to be present in kids between 6 and 12. You have to remember that asthma attacks for children are very scary. I think they're scary in adults too, I'm sure, but especially in children. Okay, it's really scary because they don't really have a lot of experience with it. They don't understand what's going on. And remember, that their cognitive understanding at the age of 6 of what asthma is very different than what yours is as an adult, right? So it's much harder for them to fully grasp it. And then, of course, asthma attacks can be triggered by things like allergies. It could be triggered by stress. It could be triggered by physical activity. But luckily, it's largely fairly easily treated with inhalers. Okay. Though in some rare cases, asthma can be really extreme and it can be really serious. Okay. Um, Also, at this age group, it's very common, or it's not uncommon to hear children who end up with psychological disorders. Okay, between 6 and 12, 1 in 5 children in middle childhood. That's 20% of all kids will be diagnosed with a psychological diagnosis that results in some level of functional impairment. Okay, common disorders that are identified in this age group are going to be things like depression, things like anxiety, especially social anxiety is a big thing for kids between 6 and 12, and ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Okay. You want to help build their confidence, right? You want to be aware of these things that might be, on the radar. Hopefully most kids, luckily most kids fall into the 80% that don't end up with any of these psychological disorders. But it is something that manifests in this age group. And of course, we want to diagnose early on so that we can intervene with, behavioral coping mechanisms and so forth. We also want to help build confidence and master minor skills through tasks. Okay. Positive reinforcement is always the way to go with kids, right? We don't want to punish for things that they can't master. We keep trying. And when they do master it, we praise and we reward, right? So that it increases their attempts to continue trying to achieve rather than discouraging it through punishment. Gross and fine motor skills improve significantly in middle childhood, and you're going to see that openly demonstrated by a lot of new activities that kids start taking on. Things like being able to ride a bike, okay, demonstrates those gross motor skills, swimming, ice skating, and then we're also going to see some fine motor skills come in there and start really flexing their fine motor skill muscles, like writing with pencils, being able to draw. Okay, their drawings from the age of 2, and then you compare their drawings at the age of 9. It's like it's a whole different kid drawing the picture, and that's because they go from really rudimentary to recognizable because they're developing those fine motor skills, and they're now able to better manipulate those smaller items. Okay, this increase in both fine and motor gross skills, or excuse me, fine motor skills and gross motor skills is a result of increased myelination in the brain. What myelination is myelin is the fatty sheath covering around all of our neurons. We have bazillions of neurons in our brain. In order for neurons to fire properly and in order for neurons to operate maximally, they have to have what we call myelination, which is having that fatty covering, which, by the way, is why we give our kids full fat milk, because full fat milk, we want those healthy fats because it stimulates and increases brain myelination. And during this time period, that myelination in the brain really starts to just thrive between the ages of 6 and 8, which means our neurons are firing more acutely, more successfully, and with more frequency, which allows for new skills and development to manifest in our behaviors. Okay, all of these developments result in increased autonomy and independence, which in turn results in increased accidents, right? This is when kids are, when they're toddlers, you have to be on them every second to make sure they're not getting into something dangerous, to make sure they're not hurting themselves. But between this 6 and 12 range, they start, traveling out into the world a little bit more independently. They have a better grasp of what they shouldn't go near, what they shouldn't do. But with that new independence comes, we call them uh-ohs, right? You hurt yourself, you trip, you fall. It's not that you can't run and walk properly, but you're still a kid, right? And you're a growing kid, right? So somewhere along the way, those fine and gross motor skills, they're going to be interrupted, or you have to adjust to, like, my feet are bigger, I'm taller, like all of those changes, which results in more accidents. So it's really common between the ages of 6 and 12 for kids to get hurt with some level of regularity. Okay. It's important to note that boys at this stage are much more rough and tumble than girls, and they tend to have accidents and injuries in greater number. That's normal. Okay. We also have to focus on, it depends on the child, it depends on the household, it depends on the school, but this is an age range in which children are going to be introduced to the internet and to cyberspace. And this comes with its own host of safety concerns that we have to focus on, things like online predators, things like kids being exposed to imagery and content that they are not emotionally or cognitively ready for at this stage. Okay, there's all kinds of things on the internet, from pornography to, recordings of people hurting themselves, killing themselves, recordings of people being murdered. Obviously, this is not appropriate for kids that age, and they are not cognitively ready to be exposed to that. It's damaging, it's traumatic. So parental presence and controls are very important, and a child's presence online should be limited, especially the younger that they are. And, most importantly, children should never, ever, ever be communicating with strangers online. That's how we protect them from predators. Just like you would not allow your child to talk to a stranger on the street, don't let them talk to strangers online. During this time period, memory function increases, as does mastery and understanding of complex language. This is when they're still really little, but they start saying big words, and it's super precocious and it's super cute. And, parents are always just kind of like, how, like, where did that come from? Mastery of reading begins in first and second grade. It's really an amazing thing to watch when they go into first grade and they can't read at all. And by the time they come out of first grade, they are reading really, really fluently. The amount of growth that happens and development that happens from the beginning of that academic year to the end is really impressively overwhelming. Okay. Speech impairments are also something that tend to manifest during this age period, and they need to be addressed. However, you want to be cautious in the way that you address them. Certainly, some speech impairments require formal intervention with a speech therapist. It's not a big deal. You don't want to play it up as a big deal. You don't want the child to be self-conscious about it. It's just something we have to take care of. Right. And certainly with proper intervention, especially at this age group, those speech impairments are usually mastered pretty easily. Stuttering is a common speech impairment that begins in middle childhood. And, we just define that as a disruption in the fluency and the delivery of speech. Occasional stuttering is not a chronic problem, and it's not something to freak out about. It's not uncommon for kids between 6 and 12 to have the occasional minor stutter. It's just sort of like a hiccup, if you will, in their speech development. If they stutter occasionally, it is imperative that you do not point it out. Okay, do not point it out, because you will create a problem that doesn't actually exist. Like I said, it's not a problem if there's some minor stuttering here and there, but if you point it out, they'll begin to perseverate on it and focus on it. It'll impact their self-esteem, and you might actually exacerbate the stuttering and create a much, much bigger speech problem out of it. Occasional stuttering is usually short term, and it just goes away on its own. You don't need intervention. You don't need a speech therapist, right? So you don't want to make an issue out of something that is a non-issue. Okay. Make sure that if the kids are stuttering, you don't point it out. Just tell them, honey, slow down. Just slow down with your speech. Don't finish their sentences for them. Let them get their language out, and let it take as long as it takes. Okay. But make sure you don't point out stuttering or make them self-conscious of it. Learning disorders also tend to manifest during this time period. Okay, and learning disorders are simply just a difficulty in the acquisition of and the use of reading, writing, listening, reasoning, and mathematical abilities. Learning disorders are not indicative of a low IQ by any means. They're just simply cognitive hurdles that need to be identified, and there needs to be an intervention, a workaround. Right? It doesn't mean that a child is less intelligent or less capable. It just means there is a challenge in the way of learning, and we have to find a way to overcome that obstacle, and the learning will occur. Okay. I did briefly mention that ADHD is it's a common onset between 6 and 12. It's characterized by, an extraordinary inability to pay attention, to sit still, and a need to express tremendous amounts of energy. This is a really, really dicey thing to diagnose, and should only be diagnosed by a medical professional, because what I just described there are all children everywhere, right? Kids have a hard time paying attention, sitting still, and they all have boundless amounts amounts of energy. It's not easy for a kid to stay in a seat for an hour or more at a time, or even for half an hour at a time, right? It's really, I think, a rabbit hole that we go down accidentally by saying, this kid just wants it still. This kid's just really high energy. Yeah, because they're a kid, right? What we really focus on, or what we should really be focusing on with ADHD, are the extreme cases when it becomes so much of an issue that the child can't learn. Okay. It's not that they just are high energy and they need breaks and, they can come back and learn. It's that, there's so much hyperactivity. There's so much inability to focus that it interferes with their ability to learn anything at all or to learn the bulk of things. It can also result, obviously, in difficult behavior. So this is largely treated with medications. It's very ironic the way that we treat this, because all of the medical treatments that we use to treat ADHD are stimulants. Okay, they are formal stimulants, which doesn't make sense at face value. So I always like to teach this. That really, I like to teach it as, it's like in math when you multiply a negative times a negative and it equals a positive, right? That we're introducing a stimulant into a brain that's already moving very, very, very quickly, faster than typical. And we've got the stimulant and the fast brain. Somehow they cancel each other out. Okay. And that's sort of how I teach how that works. Okay. But these are all the concerns and the things that tend to arise in addition to the regular development in middle childhood. But one of the biggest things we want to do in middle childhood is positively reinforce behavior and instill autonomy and self-esteem. And we want to encourage and be positive. Okay, we don't want to focus on the negative, and we don't want to stigmatize, okay, because that is also overwhelming at this age and something that can follow them for a lifetime. So if there is a problem, we just explain it as, okay, it's just a challenge. We just need an intervention and we overcome it. It's not a big deal.